Welcome back to her journey, beautiful souls. I'm your host, and today we have Mary Paul sharing a story that will redefine everything you think you know about family loyalty, second chances, and the incredible power of quiet dignity. If you're new here, we share real stories from real women who faced betrayal, heartbreak, and impossible choices, but found ways to rise above it all and create lives more beautiful than they ever imagined. Don't just listen and leave. Hit subscribe so you'll never miss another story that speaks to your soul. Ring that notification bell because Mary's journey from humiliation to triumph is going to show you that sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming everything they said you could never be. Now, let's dive into a story about ultimatums, dignity, and the sweetest kind of justice. My name is Mary Paul, and I want to tell you about the moment my own son looked me in the eye and asked me to become his wife's servant. I was sitting in their living room in Austin, Texas, on a humid Thursday afternoon in June, nursing a cup of lukewarm tea that had gone cold while I listened to what they called a family meeting. The house was beautiful, all white marble countertops, designer furniture, and those trendy gray walls that made everything look like a magazine spread. It was the kind of home I had once dreamed of having, back when I thought my life was heading in a different direction. At 58, I suppose I wasn't what most people would call traditionally beautiful anymore, though I'd been told I still had striking features, high cheekbones that caught the light just right, eyes that sparkled when I laughed, and hair that had turned silver in a way that looked elegant rather than old. But I was also what people politely called full-figured these days, carrying the kind of soft curves that came from years of cooking for others and finding comfort in food when life became too difficult to bear. My son Michael sat across from me, his hands folded in his lap like he was delivering a business presentation. At 32, he had his father's serious demeanor and my stubborn streak, though he seemed to have inherited none of my capacity for kindness. Beside him sat Lila, his wife of 2 years, swirling a glass of white wine despite it being barely 3 in the afternoon. Lila was everything I wasn't, 26, blonde, thin as a rail, and possessed of the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no. She worked in public relations, or at least that's what she called the job, where she planned parties for tech executives and posted about it on Instagram. She had made it clear from the moment she met me that she found my presence in their lives to be something of an inconvenience. "Mom," Michael began, and I could tell from his tone that he had rehearsed this speech. "We've been talking and we think we have a solution that could work for everyone." I waited, sipping my cold tea and trying to ignore the knot that was forming in my stomach. "You've been struggling since Dad died," he continued, which was true. My husband Robert had passed away suddenly 2 years ago, leaving me with medical bills, a mortgage I couldn't afford alone, and the kind of grief that makes it hard to get out of bed some mornings. "And we know you've been having trouble finding work." Also true. At 58, with a work history that consisted mainly of being a devoted wife and mother, the job market wasn't exactly welcoming me with open arms. "So we thought," Michael said, glancing at Lila for encouragement, "maybe you could stay here with us. Help out around the house. Lila's business is really taking off and we could use someone to handle the cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "You want me to be your housekeeper?" "Not a housekeeper," Lila interjected, her voice dripping with a kind of false sweetness that made my teeth ache. "More like family help. You'd have your own room, your own space. And we'd take care of all your expenses, of course." She took another sip of wine and tilted her head, studying me with the expression she usually reserved for expensive handbags she was deciding whether to buy. "You'd be perfect for it, Mary," she continued, and I noticed she never called me Mom, always Mary, as if acknowledging our family connection might somehow diminish her status. "You already look the part. And besides, with your curves, the physical activity could be good exercise for you." The words hit me like a slap across the face, though Lila delivered them with a smile that anyone watching might have mistaken for kindness. She was commenting on my weight, my appearance, my worth as a human being, all while pretending to offer me a favor. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his wife that she was out of line, to show some of the love and respect I had spent 32 years earning from him. Instead, he nodded along as if what she had said was perfectly reasonable. It could be good for everyone, Michael added. You'd have security, we'd have help, and it would keep the family together. The family. As if I hadn't been the one who held this family together for decades. As if I hadn't worked 3 jobs to put him through college after his father lost his position at the engineering firm. As if I hadn't sat by his bedside through every childhood illness, celebrated every achievement, supported every dream. Either you stay here as Lila's helper, Michael said, and I could hear the finality in his voice, or you leave. Those are the options, Mom. We can't support you financially anymore if you're not contributing to the household. I sat there for a long moment, looking at these 2 people who were supposed to love me, who were supposed to care about my dignity and my feelings. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made, all the dreams I had deferred, all the ways I had made myself smaller, so that others could be bigger. I thought about Robert, my husband of 28 years, who had always told me that I was capable of more than I realized, that I had a strength and intelligence that would carry me through anything life threw at me. He had believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. And I thought about the woman I used to be, before marriage and motherhood and grief had convinced me that my worth was measured by how much I could give to other people rather than what I could build for myself. Well, Lila asked, impatience creeping into her voice. What's it going to be, Mary? I set down my teacup, with deliberate care, smoothing my skirt as I stood up. Michael and Lila watched me expectantly, probably assuming I would accept their generous offer to let me scrub their floors in exchange for a roof over my head. I need to think about it, I said quietly. What's to think about? Lila laughed, a sound like breaking glass. It's not like you have other options. That's when I knew with absolute certainty what I was going to do. I walked upstairs to the guest room where I had been staying for the past month, pulled my suitcase out of the closet, and began to pack. I folded my clothes carefully, the way my mother had taught me to do when I was young, and we moved frequently because my father couldn't keep a job. Each item went into the suitcase with deliberate precision, as if I was packing for a journey rather than fleeing from one. My hands were steady, my movements calm. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't call anyone to complain or ask for advice. I simply packed my belongings and prepared to leave the life I had known for something I couldn't yet imagine. When I came back downstairs with my suitcase, Michael and Lila were still sitting in the living room, though now they looked confused rather than confident. Where are you going? Michael asked, standing up quickly. I'm choosing the second option, I said simply. I'm leaving. Mom, wait, he said, and for the first time that afternoon, he sounded like the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knees or had nightmares. You don't have to leave right now. We can work this out. We just did work it out, I replied. You gave me 2 choices, and I made one. Lila set down her wine glass with a sharp clink. You're being ridiculous, Mary. You're 58 years old with no job and no money. Where exactly do you think you're going to go? I looked at her for a long moment, this young woman who thought she knew everything about the world and my place in it. I'm going to find out, I said. I walked to the front door, my suitcase rolling behind me on wheels that squeaked slightly against the marble floor. Behind me, I could hear Michael and Lila arguing in hushed voices, probably debating whether to stop me or let me go. They let me go. I loaded my suitcase into my 10-year-old Honda Civic, the car that had been Robert's pride and joy before the medical bills forced us to sell his truck. The engine turned over on the second try, and I sat there for a moment in their driveway, looking back at the house where my son lived with the woman who had just told me I looked like a maid. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even feel particularly angry yet. That would come later, I knew, when the shock wore off and the reality of what had just happened settled into my bones. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a strange, electric sense of possibility. For the first time since Robert died, for the first time since I had become someone's wife and someone's mother, I belonged entirely to myself. I put the car in reverse and drove away from my son's house, away from their ultimatum, away from their version of my future. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew with absolute certainty that wherever it was, it would be better than staying behind to become someone else's servant. Behind me, my phone started ringing. I glanced at the screen and saw Michael's name. I let it go to voicemail. It was the first of many calls I wouldn't answer. Mary's quiet dignity in that moment, refusing to be reduced to someone's maid while maintaining her composure, that takes incredible strength. If you've ever been underestimated or made to feel small by people who should lift you up, you know exactly how Mary feels right now. Hit that like button if her courage is inspiring you, and share this video with someone who needs to see that walking away can be the most powerful choice you ever make. Now, let's see where Mary's journey takes her next. I drove for 3 hours before I admitted to myself that I had no destination in mind. The Texas highway stretched out before me like a promise I wasn't sure I was ready to keep, and my gas tank was approaching empty while my bank account was already there. The phone had rung 17 times since I left Austin. Michael's name appeared on the screen again and again, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What would I say? That I was sorry for not accepting his generous offer to let me clean his toilets? That I had reconsidered his wife's helpful suggestion that scrubbing floors would be good exercise for my curves? The anger was starting to build now, a slow burn in my chest that grew hotter with every mile I put between myself and their beautiful house. Not just anger at Lila's casual cruelty, though that was certainly part of it. The rage I felt was deeper and more complicated than that. I was angry at Michael for sitting there and letting his wife humiliate me. I was angry at myself for being surprised by it, for somehow thinking that raising a child with love and sacrifice would guarantee his loyalty forever. I was angry at Robert for dying and leaving me to navigate this world alone, though I knew that wasn't fair. But mostly, I was angry at the woman I had allowed myself to become, someone so diminished by circumstances and grief that even my own son couldn't see my worth beyond what I might be able to do for him. I pulled off the highway at a small town outside San Antonio, stopping at a gas station that looked like it had been built in the 1970s and hadn't been updated since. As I filled my tank, I thought about the conversation I'd had with Robert just a few months before he died. We had been sitting on our back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. He had been feeling better that day between rounds of chemotherapy that would ultimately prove ineffective, and we were pretending together that he might actually beat the cancer that was eating him alive. "Mary," he had said, reaching over to take my hand, "promise me something." "Anything," I had replied, and I had meant it. "Promise me that when I'm gone, you won't disappear. You have so much strength, so much intelligence, so much to offer the world. Don't let anyone convince you that your value is measured by how much you can give them rather than what you can build for yourself." At the time, I had promised because it was what he needed to hear. Now, standing at a gas pump in a town whose name I didn't even know, I realized it was what I needed to remember. Robert had always seen things in me that I couldn't see in myself. He had met me when I was 26, working as a secretary at a law firm and going to night school to get my business degree. I had dreams then, plans to start my own catering company, ideas about creating something that was entirely mine. But then we fell in love, and then we got married, and then Michael came along, and somehow those dreams got filed away in favor of more immediate concerns. There was always something more pressing than my own ambitions. Robert's career, Michael's school activities, the mortgage, the car payments, the endless list of responsibilities that come with building a life with other people. I had convinced myself that this was what love looked like, making yourself smaller so that the people you cared about could be bigger. I had been so focused on being a good wife and mother that I had forgotten how to be Mary. But Robert had remembered. Even as he was dying, he had seen the woman I used to be and the woman I could still become. People who underestimate you, he had told me once, are just handing you the keys to their own undoing. As I replaced the gas cap and climbed back into my car, I thought about those words. Michael and Lila had certainly underestimated me. They had looked at a 58-year-old widow with a limited work history and seen someone whose only value lay in her ability to clean their house and cook their meals. They had no idea who I really was. More importantly, they had no idea who I was capable of becoming. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Sarah Martinez had been my best friend in high school before life took us in different directions. We had reconnected on Facebook a few years ago, exchanging the usual pleasantries and promises to get together that never materialized. Sarah lived in a small town about an hour south of San Antonio, where she ran a bed and breakfast that catered to tourists visiting the local wineries. We had talked briefly at Robert's funeral, and she had mentioned that she had a small guest house on her property that she sometimes rented to people who needed a quiet place to figure out their next steps. I called her before I could lose my nerve. "Mary Paul," Sarah said when she answered, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I was just thinking about you yesterday. How are you doing, honey?" I paused, not sure how to explain my current situation without sounding completely pathetic. "I'm in need of a fresh start, Sarah. Do you still have that guest house available?" There was a brief silence, and I could almost hear her processing the implications of my question. "Of course I do," she said finally. "How soon do you need it?" "Tonight, if possible." "Mary, what's going on? Are you okay?" I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes for the first time since I had left Austin. Sarah's voice was warm and concerned and completely free of judgment, and I realized how long it had been since anyone had spoken to me with simple human kindness. "I will be," I said. "I just need some time and space to figure out what comes next." "You've got it," Sarah said without hesitation. "The address is 1247 Bluebonnet Lane. It's about 10 minutes past the town square. There's a key under the flower pot by the front door, and I'll stock the fridge before you get here." "Sarah, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," she said. "You just need to take care of yourself." As I drove towards Sarah's town, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping kind of hope that comes from needing other people to save you, but the quiet, determined kind that comes from realizing you might be able to save yourself. My phone rang again. Michael's name appeared on the screen for the 18th time. I glanced at it, then put the phone face down on the passenger seat. "Not yet," I said aloud to my empty car. Not yet. I had spent 2 years answering everyone else's demands, responding to everyone else's emergencies, prioritizing everyone else's needs over my own. For once in my life, I was going to take the time I needed to figure out who Mary Paul was when she wasn't being someone's wife or someone's mother or someone's maid. The sun was setting as I pulled into Sarah's driveway, painting the sky in the same colors Robert and I had watched from our back porch. But this time, I wasn't watching the sunset as an ending. I was watching it as a beginning. The guest house was perfect in its simplicity. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, and a living area with windows that looked out onto Sarah's gardens. It was clean and comfortable and quiet, the kind of place where you could hear yourself think for the first time in years. I had been there for a week when Sarah knocked on my door with a pot of coffee and what she called a wellness check. "You've been holed up in here like a hermit," she said, settling into one of the 2 chairs by the window. "Not that I'm judging, sometimes we all need to hibernate for a while. But I'm curious about what happens next." I poured myself a cup of coffee and considered her question. What did happen next? I had exactly $347 in my checking account, no job prospects, and a son who had called 28 times without getting an answer. "I need to find work," I said. "I just don't know what kind of work someone like me is qualified to do." Sarah studied me over her coffee cup. She was the same age as me but had never married, never had children, never sacrificed her own dreams for someone else's comfort. She had built her bed and breakfast from nothing, creating a successful business that supported her and employed half a dozen local women. "What do you love to do?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when you're doing something that makes you lose track of time, something that makes you feel like yourself, what is it?" I thought about it. It had been so long since anyone had asked me what I loved rather than what I was needed for. "I love to cook," I said finally. "I love creating meals that make people happy, that bring them together. I love the way someone's face changes when they taste something I've made that reminds them of home or childhood or a special occasion." "That's a skill," Sarah said. "That's a talent. That's something you could build on." "I'm 58 years old, Sarah. Nobody wants to hire a middle-aged woman with no professional cooking experience." "Then don't ask them to hire you," she said. "Hire yourself." Over the next few days, Sarah and I talked about possibilities. The town had a small diner that served basic breakfast food to truckers and local workers, but there wasn't anywhere to get a really good meal that felt like someone's grandmother had made it with love and attention. "There's a commercial kitchen at the community center that rents space by the hour," Sarah told me. "And there are plenty of people around here who work long hours and would pay good money for homemade meals they could pick up on their way home." It was a small idea, but it felt manageable. I could start by making meals for a few people, see if there was interest, build slowly and carefully. I didn't need to reinvent myself overnight. I just needed to start somewhere. I used $200 of my remaining money to rent the community center kitchen for a week and to buy ingredients for 20 meals. I made my grandmother's pot roast with vegetables, my mother's chicken and dumplings, and a lasagna recipe I had perfected during Michael's high school years when he was bringing friends home for dinner every night. I packaged everything in disposable containers with handwritten labels that said, "Mary's Table, Made with Love." Then I drove around town, stopping at businesses and asking if I could leave a flyer advertising homemade meals available for pickup the next day. The response was better than I had dared to hope. By 5 p.m. the following day, I had sold 18 of the 20 meals and had orders for 15 more. The truckers at the diner were asking if I did breakfast foods. The women at the beauty salon wanted to know if I catered small parties. For the first time in months, I felt useful in a way that had nothing to do with what I could sacrifice for other people and everything to do with what I could create for myself. That evening, I was cleaning up the community center kitchen when my phone rang. I had been ignoring calls from Michael for 2 weeks, but this time the caller ID showed a different name, Lila. I stared at the phone for a moment, debating whether to answer. Finally, curiosity won out. "Hello, Lila." "Mary." Her voice was tight with frustration. "Michael has been trying to reach you for weeks. He's worried sick." "I'm fine," I said simply. "Where are you?" "I'm figuring out my next steps." "This is ridiculous," Lila said, and I could hear the whine in her voice. It was after 6, which meant she was well into her evening drinking routine. "You're acting like a child who didn't get her way." I felt the familiar surge of anger, but this time it was different. Instead of the helpless rage I had carried for so long, this felt clean and focused and powerful. "Is there something you need, Lila? I need you to come home and stop being dramatic. Michael misses you, and frankly, we could use the help around the house. The maid position is still available." "Don't be like that. You know it wasn't like that." But it was exactly like that, and we both knew it. "I'm happy where I am," I said. "I'm building something for myself." Lila laughed, and it was the same sound of breaking glass I remembered from that afternoon in their living room. "Building what?" "Mary, you're 58 years old with no money and no prospects. Whatever little project you're working on isn't going to last. You'll be back. Maybe, I said. But maybe not. You'll never survive without the family, she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice, as if she was delivering a verdict rather than an opinion. We'll see, I said, and hung up. I stood in the empty kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of my first successful day as an entrepreneur, and thought about Lila's prediction. She was probably right that this was a long shot, that starting over at 58 was crazy, that I might very well fail, and end up back on their doorstep asking for the maid job. But as I packed up my equipment and prepared to go back to my quiet guest house, I realized something important. I would rather fail at building my own life than succeed at living someone else's version of what my life should be. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Had your pot roast today? Best meal I've had since my mama died. Can you do fried chicken next week? Earl from the auto shop. I smiled and typed back. Absolutely. Mary's table, made with love. For the first time since Robert died, I felt like myself again. Mary's first taste of independence and success is so beautiful to watch. The way she's channeling her pain into purpose, using her skills to build something entirely her own, that's the kind of resilience that changes everything. If you're cheering for Mary's small but significant victory, hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to see that it's never too late to start over. Mary's just getting started, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Stay with us. Within a month, Mary's table had evolved from a desperate attempt to make ends meet into something that resembled an actual business. I was renting the community center kitchen 3 days a week, had a regular customer base of about 40 people, and had started a simple website where people could place orders for pickup. Sarah had suggested I create an Instagram account to showcase my food, and though I had initially resisted social media as something for younger people, I discovered I had a natural eye for photographing my dishes. My grandmother's cast iron skillet made everything look rustic and authentic, and I started incorporating vintage linens and fresh flowers from Sarah's garden to create images that looked like they belonged in a magazine about country living. The response was remarkable. People in town started following my account, sharing photos of their meals and tagging their friends. Food bloggers from San Antonio began making the drive out to try my cooking, writing reviews that described my meals as soul food in the truest sense, and the kind of cooking that makes you remember what home feels like. But more than the business success, what struck me was how different I felt when I was working on something that belonged entirely to me. For the first time in decades, I was making decisions based on my own judgment rather than someone else's expectations. I chose the recipes, set the prices, decided which orders to accept and which to decline. It was intoxicating in a way I hadn't expected. One afternoon, I was delivering meals to the law office downtown when I overheard a conversation that made me stop in my tracks. "Did you see that Mary Paul is doing some kind of catering business now?" one of the secretaries was saying to another. "The woman whose son lives in Austin? I heard she moved out here after some kind of family drama. I heard her son's wife is quite the piece of work. Apparently, she's got connections to some big-shot family in Austin but thinks she's better than everyone else." This casual gossip gave me an idea. If people were already talking about my situation, I might as well make sure they had the right information. Over the next few weeks, I started paying more attention to the social dynamics of the area. I learned that reputation mattered in small communities, that people remembered how you treated others, and that authentic kindness was valued more than flashy success. I began developing what I thought of as my soft influence campaign. Nothing dramatic or obviously vindictive, just careful cultivation of relationships that might prove useful later. I started catering small office lunches and church meetings, always with the same warm, professional demeanor that made people feel like they were being cared for by someone's beloved aunt. I listened to conversations, remembered details, and slowly built a network of people who knew me as Mary, the lovely woman who made the most wonderful food and always had time to ask about your family. During one of these events, I met Jennifer, a young woman who worked at a marketing firm in San Antonio. She was in her late 20s, ambitious and hardworking, with the kind of sharp intelligence that reminded me of myself at that age. "Your chicken salad sandwiches are incredible," Jennifer told me as I was packing up after a retirement party. "My grandmother used to make something similar, but she never would give me the recipe." "The secret is in the seasoning," I said, then leaned in conspiratorially. "And a touch of white wine vinegar. It brightens everything up." "You should write a cookbook," Jennifer said. "Or teach cooking classes. You have such a gift for this." "Maybe someday," I replied. "Right now, I'm just enjoying being able to do something I love." Over coffee the following week, Jennifer and I talked about her work, her frustrations with difficult clients, and her observations about the Austin business scene. "There are so many people in PR and event planning who promise the world but can't deliver," Jennifer mentioned casually. "Clients are getting more demanding about actually getting what they pay for." "That makes sense," I said. "People want authenticity, not just performance."
Exactly.
We've had several potential clients come to us after bad experiences with other firms. Usually, it's someone who is more interested in being seen as successful than in actually serving their clients well. I made sympathetic noises while filing away this information for future use. Meanwhile, my business continued to grow. I had expanded from individual meals to catering small events, and I was booking parties weeks in advance. My Instagram following had grown to several thousand people, including food influencers and lifestyle bloggers who regularly featured my work. Most satisfying of all, I was making enough money to support myself comfortably while building a reputation based entirely on my own merit. I wasn't surviving because someone took pity on me or because I had accepted a degrading compromise. I was thriving because I had something valuable to offer the world. My phone still rang occasionally with calls from Michael, but the frequency had decreased as the weeks passed. I wasn't ready to talk to him yet, wasn't ready to risk undermining my own progress by getting pulled back into their dysfunction. But I was getting ready for something else entirely. I was getting ready to expand my reach, to start building connections that would eventually put me in contact with the world that Michael and Lila inhabited. I was getting ready to show them, and everyone in their social circle, exactly what happened when you underestimated Mary Paul. The foundation was solid. Now it was time to start building something that would be impossible to ignore. By the end of my third month in business, Mary's Table had become something of a local phenomenon. I was catering events throughout Central Texas, had been featured in 3 different food magazines, and had a waiting list for my weekend dinner service that stretched out for 2 months. More importantly, I had cultivated relationships with dozens of influential people who knew me as someone competent, reliable, and discreet, exactly the kind of person they wanted handling their private events and family gatherings. It was at one of these gatherings, a garden party celebrating a prominent attorney's wife's birthday, that I first heard about the Morrison family connection. I was arranging individual portions of lavender honey cheesecake when I overheard 2 women discussing Austin's social scene. "Did you know Patricia Morrison's daughter-in-law is trying to break into the PR business?" one was saying. "The Morrison family? From the law firm?" "Yes, that's the one. Apparently, the girl is quite ambitious, but doesn't seem to understand that connections only get you so far. You actually have to deliver results." My pulse quickened. If there was a Morrison family connection to Lila, this could be the opening I had been looking for. Over the following weeks, I made it my business to learn more about the Morrison family and their social circle. They were exactly the kind of people who valued reputation and respectability above all else, who would be mortified by association with anything they perceived as unprofessional or embarrassing. I began positioning myself to enter their orbit, not as someone seeking their approval, but as someone who belonged in their world because of her own accomplishments. I started attending charity events and community gatherings where I knew the Austin social set would be present. Not as someone trying to infiltrate their circle, but as Mary from Mary's Table, the charming caterer who made everyone feel special and remembered details about their lives that even their closest friends forgot. I volunteered to provide desserts for a hospital fundraiser where I knew several Morrison family friends would be in attendance. I donated meals to a silent auction benefiting the local animal shelter, with proceeds going to a cause that several influential women in the area supported passionately. Slowly, carefully, I began to establish myself as someone worth knowing, not because of my social connections or my husband's success, but because of my own talents and character. At each event, I listened more than I spoke. I remembered names and faces and personal details. I asked thoughtful questions about people's families and interests. I made myself useful without being obsequious, memorable without being pushy. And occasionally, when the conversation turned to local business owners or service providers, I would mention, always regretfully, always with apparent reluctance, some small concern about working with people who seemed more interested in their own status than in serving their clients well. I just think it's so important to work with people who understand that this isn't about them, you know? I would say, when someone is planning their daughter's wedding or their company's anniversary party, they need to feel like they're the priority, not like they're lucky to be working with someone so important. It was subtle, but it was effective. I was planting seeds of doubt about people who prioritized their own ego over their clients' needs, people who leveraged family connections instead of earning respect through professional competence. People like Lila. The opportunity one had been waiting for came in the form of a phone call from someone named Patricia Morrison herself. Mrs. Paul, this is Patricia Morrison. I understand you're the wonderful woman who catered the Henderson anniversary party last month. Yes, that's right. I hope you enjoyed the evening. It was lovely. I was particularly impressed with your attention to detail and your professional manner. I'm planning a small dinner party for some business associates of my husband's, and I'd love to discuss the possibility of having you cater the event. This was it. This was my chance to enter the world that Lila so desperately wanted to be part of, not as someone's charity case or family connection, but as a respected professional whose services were in demand. I'd be honored to discuss it with you, Mrs. Morrison. Over the next hour, Patricia and I talked about her vision for the evening, the kind of impression she wanted to create, and the level of service she expected. She was intelligent, discerning, and clearly accustomed to working with the best. More importantly, she treated me as an equal, someone whose expertise she respected and whose judgment she trusted. As we finalized the details, Patricia mentioned something that made my heart race. You know, I believe we may have a mutual connection. My daughter-in-law Lila mentioned that she knows you somehow. I kept my voice carefully neutral. Oh yes, Lila. She's married to my son Michael. How wonderful, Patricia said, though something in her tone suggested it wasn't wonderful at all. Small world, isn't it? Indeed it is. I look forward to working with you, Mrs. Paul. Based on what I've heard about your work, I have very high expectations. I won't disappoint you, I said, and I meant it completely. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. I had just been hired by Patricia Morrison, Lila's mother-in-law, not because of any family connection, but because of my reputation as a professional caterer. The irony was delicious. The woman who had dismissed me as potential maid material was about to watch her own mother-in-law treat me as a valued professional whose services were worth paying premium prices to secure. But this was just the beginning. I had 3 weeks to plan and execute a dinner party that would not only meet Patricia Morrison's high standards, but would also demonstrate to her exactly what kind of woman her daughter-in-law had so casually dismissed. Over the next few days, I threw myself into planning with the kind of focused intensity that I had once reserved for Michael's school projects and Robert's business entertaining. Every detail had to be perfect. Every element had to demonstrate the kind of sophisticated professionalism that Patricia valued. I researched each guest who would be attending, learning about their preferences and dietary restrictions. I designed a menu that would showcase seasonal ingredients while demonstrating advanced culinary techniques. I coordinated with florists and rental companies to ensure that every visual element would contribute to the elegant atmosphere Patricia wanted to create. But most importantly, I prepared myself to interact with these influential people as Mary Paul, successful entrepreneur, rather than Mary Paul, rejected mother-in-law. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. I bought a new dress for the event, had my hair professionally styled, and invested in jewelry that suggested success without being ostentatious. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone who belonged in Patricia Morrison's world, someone who commanded respect through competence rather than connections. The night before the dinner party, Michael called again. This time, I answered. Mom. His voice was filled with relief and surprise. Mom, thank God. Where have you been? We've been so worried. I've been building a business, Michael. I'm doing very well. A business? Mom, what kind of business? Are you okay? Do you need money? I could hear the assumption in his voice that I must be struggling, that I must need rescuing, that surely I had learned my lesson about refusing his generous offer. I'm catering a dinner party tomorrow night for some very prominent people in Austin, I said calmly. The Morrison family, actually. I believe you know them through Lila. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. The Morrison family hired you? Michael sounded confused, as if I had told him I was catering for the royal family. Patricia Morrison, specifically. She heard about my work through her social circle and requested my services for an important business dinner. But, Mom, how did you? I mean, you've never done professional catering before. I've been running Mary's table for 4 months now. We're quite successful. Another silence, longer this time. Mom, this is incredible. I had no idea you were doing so well. There's a lot you don't know about me, Michael, I said gently. There's a lot I didn't know about myself until recently. Could we get together soon? I'd love to hear about what you've been doing. After tomorrow night, I said. Let me get through this event first. Of course.
Mom,
I'm really proud of you. The words I had waited months to hear finally came, but they felt different now. Less essential. I had learned to be proud of myself, which made his approval nice but not necessary. Thank you, Michael. I'll call you in a few days. As I hung up, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. I was no longer the desperate mother hoping for her son's approval. I was a successful woman who might have room in her life for a relationship with a son who had finally learned to see her worth. But first, I had a dinner party to execute. A dinner party that would establish me once and for all as someone who belonged in the highest social circles, someone whose professional competence was beyond question. A dinner party that would show Patricia Morrison exactly what kind of woman her daughter-in-law had tried to turn into a servant. The dinner party for Patricia Morrison's business associates was scheduled for a Saturday evening in early December, and I had spent 3 weeks perfecting every detail. The menu featured winter comfort foods elevated to restaurant quality, butternut squash soup with truffle oil, herb-crusted beef tenderloin with red wine reduction, and individual chocolate lava cakes that would arrive at the table still warm from the oven. But more than the food, I had designed the entire experience to showcase exactly the kind of sophisticated professionalism that Patricia valued and that her daughter-in-law apparently lacked. I arrived at the Morrison estate 3 hours before the guests were expected, bringing with me 2 assistants I had hired for the evening, culinary students who were eager to learn and grateful for the opportunity to work a high-end event. We moved through the house with quiet efficiency, transforming the formal dining room into something that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread about gracious entertaining. Patricia watched us work with obvious satisfaction. Mary, this is exactly what I had envisioned. You have such an eye for creating atmosphere. Thank you. I want our guests to feel like they're being welcomed into your home, not attending a business function. That's perfect. That's exactly the impression we want to create. As the guests began arriving, I retreated to the kitchen to oversee the final preparations. Through the service window, I could see Patricia greeting her visitors with a kind of warm authority that comes from decades of successful entertaining. These were clearly people accustomed to the finest things, but they seemed genuinely delighted by the intimate, welcoming atmosphere we had created. The evening progressed flawlessly. Each course was perfectly timed, beautifully presented, and enthusiastically received. The guests lingered over dinner, the conversation flowing as smoothly as the wine I had selected to complement each dish. But the moment I had been anticipating came during dessert service, when Patricia approached me in the kitchen with a woman I recognized from newspaper photos as Judge Margaret Caldwell, one of the most respected jurists in the state. "Mary, I want you to meet Judge Caldwell," Patricia said. "Margaret, this is Mary Paul, the extraordinary woman responsible for this wonderful evening." Judge Caldwell was a woman in her 70s with silver hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She had the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. "Mrs. Paul, this meal has been absolutely exceptional," she said, extending her hand. "Patricia tells me you're relatively new to the catering business, but your work tonight suggests years of experience." "Thank you, Your Honor. I've been cooking for family and friends most of my life, but I only recently discovered that I could make a living doing what I love." "And what brought about that discovery, if you don't mind my asking?" I had prepared for this question, knowing that my personal story might come up in conversation with Patricia's guests. Life circumstances changed, and I found myself needing to reinvent myself at 58, I said simply. "It turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me." "How wonderful," Judge Caldwell said, and I could see genuine admiration in her expression. There's something particularly inspiring about a woman who builds something entirely her own later in life. You must be very proud of what you've accomplished. "I am," I said, and realized that I meant it completely. After the guests departed and my assistants had finished cleaning up, Patricia walked me to my car, pressing a generous check into my hands along with something even more valuable. "Mary, I want you to know that this evening exceeded every expectation I had," she said. "I'm going to be recommending your services to everyone I know." "I'm so glad everything went well." "It went beyond well. You created exactly the kind of experience that makes people remember why they enjoy spending time together." Patricia paused, studying me in the soft light from the porch lamp. "You know, I have to say, when Lila first mentioned that she knew you, I wasn't sure what to expect." "Oh." She had described you as someone who was struggling to adjust to widowhood. Someone who might need guidance about how to move forward productively. I felt a familiar surge of anger, but it was different now, cleaner, more focused, less about hurt feelings and more about righteous indignation. "I suppose everyone processes change differently," I said carefully. "Indeed they do. But tonight, watching you work, seeing how you handle yourself professionally, well, let's just say that Lila's assessment seems to have been rather inaccurate." This was exactly what I had been hoping to hear. Patricia had formed her own opinion about my capabilities, and it contradicted everything her daughter-in-law had said about me. "Speaking of Lila," Patricia continued, "I understand she's been trying to establish herself in the PR business?" "So I've heard." "Yes, well, unfortunately, professionalism seems to be something of a challenge for her. We've had several awkward situations with business associates who found her approach inappropriate." Patricia didn't elaborate, but she didn't need to. The implication was clear. Lila's behavior had become an embarrassment to the family, and Patricia was beginning to question her son's choice in wives. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "It's always difficult when family business becomes complicated." "Yes, it is. But tonight has reminded me that there are still people who understand what it means to conduct oneself with grace and competence." As I drove home to my guest house, I thought about Patricia's words. Without ever directly criticizing Lila or defending myself against her characterizations, I had demonstrated through my own actions that her assessment of me had been completely wrong. More importantly, I had established myself as someone Patricia respected and trusted, someone whose judgment and character she valued. In the world of social hierarchies that people like the Morrisons inhabited, that kind of endorsement was worth more than any amount of advertising or self-promotion. The next morning, my phone started ringing early. Word of the previous evening's success had spread through Patricia's network with remarkable speed, and I found myself fielding inquiries about availability for holiday parties, New Year's celebrations, and spring events. But the most satisfying development was learning, through my network of contacts, that Patricia had begun making subtle inquiries about Lila's professional competence and personal character. The questions were discreet but pointed. Had anyone worked with her professionally? What had their experience been like? Did she demonstrate the kind of judgment and reliability that the Morrison family expected from their associates? The answers, apparently, were not flattering. Within a week, I heard through Jennifer that Lila had lost 2 potential clients after their initial consultations, with both citing concerns about her professionalism and her tendency to make the events about herself rather than about her clients' needs. The cracks in Lila's carefully constructed facade were beginning to widen, and I had barely done anything more than demonstrate my own competence and character. But I wasn't done yet. The foundation I had built was solid, but the structure I was planning to erect on top of it was going to be much more dramatic. Patricia's dinner party had been my introduction to Austin's most influential social circle. What came next would establish me as an indispensable part of that world, while simultaneously revealing just how unsuited Lila was to inhabit it. The way Mary has quietly infiltrated the very social circle that Lila desperately wants to be part of, and established herself as someone Patricia Morrison respects and values. That's strategic brilliance at its finest. Patricia's subtle criticism of Lila, combined with her obvious admiration for Mary, shows how completely the narrative is shifting. If you're loving Mary's methodical approach to justice, hit that like button and share this video. We're about to see Mary make her most decisive move yet. Stay tuned. The opportunity one had been waiting for arrived in the form of a phone call from Patricia Morrison on a cold January morning. Her voice carried an unusual note of urgency that immediately caught my attention. "Mary, I have a situation, and I'm hoping you might be able to help me." "Of course, Mrs. Morrison. What can I do for you?" The Austin Chamber of Commerce is hosting their annual Winter Gala next month, and it's turning into quite the prestigious event. The keynote speaker is Governor Richardson, and we're expecting over 300 of the most influential people in the state. I waited, sensing there was more to the story. The original caterer, someone Lila recommended, actually, has just informed us that they're backing out. Apparently, they've taken on a larger contract and can no longer accommodate our event. This was interesting. Lila had been involved in selecting the original caterer, which meant she would be partially responsible for the crisis that was now unfolding. "When is the event?" I asked. "February 14th. Valentine's Day," which seemed romantic at the time, but now it's complicating everything because every decent caterer in the city is already booked for wedding-related events. 3 weeks. It was an incredibly tight timeline for an event of that magnitude, but it was also exactly the kind of challenge that would allow me to demonstrate my capabilities on the largest possible stage. "Mrs. Morrison, I'd be honored to help you with this event." "Mary, are you sure? This isn't like the intimate dinner parties you've been doing. We're talking about a sit-down dinner for 300 people, cocktail reception, dessert station, the works. It's a massive undertaking." "I understand the scope," I said calmly, "and I'm confident that I can deliver exactly what you need." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear Patricia calculating the risks of trusting such an important event to someone who had never handled anything of this scale. "The budget is substantial," she said finally. This isn't about cutting costs. This is about preventing a complete disaster that would embarrass everyone involved, including my husband's firm. I would never compromise on quality, regardless of the budget. My reputation depends on every event being flawless. All right, Patricia said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. Let's meet tomorrow morning to discuss the details. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of menu planning, vendor coordination, and staff recruitment. I called in every favor I had accumulated over the past 6 months, reached out to culinary students and professional servers throughout Central Texas, and arranged for rental equipment that would transform the Chamber's event space into something worthy of a governor's presence. But the most satisfying aspect of the entire process was knowing that Lila was watching her own failure unfold in real time. Through my network of contacts, I learned that Lila had been bragging for weeks about her role in organizing the Chamber Gala, positioning herself as the mastermind behind what was supposed to be the social event of the season. She had invited dozens of potential clients to attend, promising them that they would see her vision and execution skills on full display. The caterer's last-minute cancellation had left Lila scrambling to save face, while Patricia quietly reached out to me for rescue. It was a perfect demonstration of the difference between someone who talked about professional competence and someone who actually possessed it. I spent the week before the event in constant motion, coordinating deliveries, training temporary staff, and fine-tuning every detail of what would be the most ambitious undertaking of my career. Sarah helped where she could, and even recruited several of her bed and breakfast guests to assist with setup on the day of the event. "Mary, are you sure you're not taking on too much?" Sarah asked as we reviewed the final timeline. "This is a huge leap from dinner parties for 12 people. "I'm sure," I said, though privately I was terrified. If this event failed, it wouldn't just damage my reputation, it would destroy it completely. But if it succeeded, it would establish me as someone capable of handling the most demanding clients and the most prestigious events in the state. The day of the gala arrived with unseasonably warm weather and clear skies, which felt like a good omen. I arrived at the venue at 6 in the morning with my team of 24 servers, cooks, and coordinators, and we transformed the space into something that looked like it had been designed by a team of professional event planners. The menu I had created was ambitious but achievable. Past hors d'oeuvres during the cocktail reception, a 3-course dinner featuring local ingredients prepared with restaurant-quality techniques, and a dessert presentation that included individual chocolate soufflés timed to arrive at each table exactly as the governor finished his keynote address. As the guests began arriving for the 6 o'clock cocktail hour, I watched from the kitchen with a mixture of pride and anxiety. Everything looked perfect, but the real test would come when 300 of Texas's most discerning people sat down to evaluate my food and service. Patricia found me during the cocktail hour, looking elegant in a navy blue gown that complemented her silver hair. "Mary, this is absolutely stunning," she said, gesturing toward the dining room where guests were mingling beneath chandeliers and floral arrangements that created exactly the sophisticated atmosphere we had envisioned. "I can't believe you pulled this together in 3 weeks." "Thank you. I'm glad it meets your expectations." "It exceeds them. Far exceeds them." As dinner service began, I moved through the kitchen like a conductor leading an orchestra, coordinating timing and presentation to ensure that each course arrived at every table simultaneously. My temporary staff worked with a kind of focused efficiency that comes from clear direction and thorough preparation. The first course, a delicate winter squash soup with spiced creme fraiche, was received with a kind of appreciative murmur that tells you people are genuinely surprised by the quality of what they're experiencing. The main course, herb-crusted rack of lamb with roasted root vegetables, prompted actual applause from several tables. But the moment I knew the evening was a complete success came during dessert service, when Governor Richardson himself approached the kitchen to compliment the meal. "Mrs. Paul, I've attended more political dinners than I care to count, and I can honestly say this is among the finest meals I've ever been served at a public event," he said, shaking my hand warmly. "You've set a new standard for what these gatherings can be." As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, I found myself surrounded by people requesting my business card, asking about availability for their own events, and expressing amazement that they had never heard of Mary's table before tonight. But the most meaningful moment came when Patricia approached me as I was supervising the cleanup. "Mary, I need you to understand what you've accomplished tonight," she said, her voice serious. "This wasn't just a successful dinner party. This was a demonstration of competence and professionalism that has impressed some of the most demanding people in the state. I'm so glad everything went well. It went beyond well. You've established yourself as someone who can be trusted with the most important events, the most discerning clients. Do you understand what that means?" I nodded, though I suspected Patricia was about to explain it to me anyway. "It means that you've become someone people want to be associated with, someone whose success reflects well on their own judgment. It means that anyone who previously underestimated you is going to have to reconsider their assessment." As I drove home that night, exhausted but exhilarated, I thought about Patricia's words. She was right that the evening had been more than just a successful catering job. It had been a public demonstration that Mary Paul was someone to be reckoned with, someone whose capabilities extended far beyond what anyone had imagined. Most importantly, it had been a very public repudiation of Lila's characterization of me as someone who needed guidance and assistance to navigate the world productively. My phone was already ringing with inquiries from people who had attended the gala, and I knew that by Monday morning, Mary's table would be the most sought-after catering service in Central Texas. But beyond the business success, what satisfied me most was knowing that Lila had spent the evening watching her former mother-in-law, the woman she had dismissed as potential maid material, command the respect and admiration of everyone she had been trying to impress. The first blow had been delivered, and it had been devastating in its precision. The success of the Chamber of Commerce Gala transformed my business overnight. Within a week, I had received inquiries from political campaigns, corporate executives, and society families throughout Texas. My calendar was booked solid through the end of the year, and I had been featured in Austin Monthly magazine as one of the rising stars in Texas hospitality. But the most significant development was an invitation that arrived on elegant cream-colored stationery, addressed in calligraphy that spoke of old money and older traditions. Mrs. Patricia Morrison requested the pleasure of my company at a garden party celebrating her mother's 80th birthday. Not as the caterer, as a guest. I held the invitation for a long moment, understanding its significance. This wasn't just a social courtesy or a thank you gesture for my professional services. This was Patricia Morrison publicly declaring that Mary Paul belonged in her social circle, that I was someone worth knowing independent of my ability to provide services. It was also, though Patricia might not have intended it this way, a direct repudiation of everything Lila had said about my worth and social position. I arrived at the Morrison estate on a perfect spring afternoon, wearing a dress I had purchased specifically for the occasion, not the kind of practical outfit I wore while working, but something that announced that I belonged in this setting. The garden was filled with women who represented the pinnacle of Austin society. Judges' wives, political figures, philanthropists, and business leaders who controlled millions of dollars and influenced thousands of lives. Patricia greeted me with genuine warmth, introducing me to her mother and her closest friends as Mary Paul, the extraordinary woman who saved our chamber gala and has become one of the most sought-after caterers in the state. "How wonderful to meet you, dear," said Patricia's mother, a formidable woman in her 80s who carried herself with the kind of authority that comes from decades of moving in influential circles. "Patricia has told me so much about your work. It's refreshing to meet someone who has built something significant through sheer talent and determination." As I mingled with the other guests, I was struck by how easily I fit into this environment. These women appreciated intelligence, competence, and authentic achievement, qualities I had spent months developing and demonstrating. They asked thoughtful questions about my business, shared their own experiences as entrepreneurs and professionals, and treated me as an equal rather than a curiosity. It was during this garden party that I encountered David Morrison, Lila's husband, for the first time since my transformation. David was a pleasant man in his early 30s who had inherited his mother's intelligence and his father's steady demeanor. He seemed genuinely surprised to see me at his grandmother's party, though he recovered quickly and approached me with a warm smile. "Mrs. Paul, what a pleasant surprise," he said, kissing my cheek in the casual way that people in his social circle greeted acquaintances. "Mother has been telling us all about your remarkable success with a catering business."
Thank you, David.
"I hope you and Lila are doing well." Something flickered across his expression at the mention of his wife's name, but he recovered smoothly. "We're fine, thank you. Lila's been quite busy with her PR work, though I understand the market has been challenging lately." This was an understatement, as I well knew. Through my network of contacts, I had learned that Lila's business was essentially failing. Her few remaining clients had been terminating their contracts after a series of professional disasters that had become the subject of gossip throughout Austin's business community. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "The service industry can be very demanding." "Yes, it can be, which makes your success all the more impressive. Lila mentioned that you and your son Michael had some kind of disagreement." I chose my words carefully. "We had different ideas about what my future should look like. I'm glad I chose to pursue my own path." David nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes family members don't see our potential as clearly as we see it ourselves." This conversation was interrupted by Patricia, who approached with Judge Caldwell and two other women I recognized as prominent figures in Austin's charitable and cultural organizations. "Mary, I wanted you to meet some friends who are very interested in your work," Patricia said. "Ladies, this is Mary, Paul, the woman I've been telling you about." What followed was one of the most professionally significant conversations of my life. These women controlled the budgets for major charitable events, political fundraisers, and cultural celebrations throughout Central Texas. By the end of our discussion, I had secured commitments for 4 major events and had been invited to submit proposals for 3 others. But the most meaningful moment of the afternoon came when Patricia's mother pulled me aside for a private conversation. "My dear," she said, leading me to a quiet corner of the garden, "I want you to know how impressed I am with what you've accomplished. It takes tremendous courage to reinvent yourself at any age, but to do it with such grace and success, well, that speaks to exceptional character." "Thank you, Mrs. Morrison. That means a great deal to me. I've been watching you today, and I can see that you have something many people lack: authentic dignity. You don't need to prove yourself to anyone because you know your own worth." She paused, studying me with a kind of direct gaze that suggested she was about to say something important. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but from what Patricia has told me about your family situation, it sounds like some people failed to recognize what they had in you." "Everyone makes their own choices," I said diplomatically. "Indeed they do. And sometimes those choices reveal more about their character than about the worth of the person they're choosing to dismiss." As the afternoon wound down and guests began to depart, Patricia walked me to my car with an expression that suggested she had something specific she wanted to discuss. "Mary, I hope you don't mind me asking, but what exactly happened between you and your family? I know it's none of my business, but after getting to know you, I find it hard to understand how anyone could fail to appreciate what you bring to their lives." I had been expecting this question, and I had prepared a response that was truthful without being vindictive. "My son and his wife felt that I should be grateful for the opportunity to serve them in their home," I said simply. "I felt that I had more to offer the world than that." Patricia's expression hardened slightly. "They wanted you to work as their domestic help?" "Something like that. And Lila supported this arrangement." She was the one who suggested it. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her reassessing everything she thought she knew about her daughter-in-law and her family dynamics. I see, she said finally. Well, I think today has demonstrated rather conclusively that their assessment of your capabilities was somewhat inadequate. As I drove home from a garden party, I reflected on what had just occurred. I had been publicly embraced by the most influential woman in Austin society, had secured enough business to ensure my financial success for years to come, and had established myself as someone who belonged in the highest social circles. More importantly, I had done all of this while maintaining my dignity and integrity, without ever stooping to the kind of petty cruelty that Lila had shown me. But the most satisfying aspect of the afternoon was knowing that word of my social triumph would inevitably reach Lila and Michael. They would learn that the woman they had dismissed as potential maid material was now being courted by governors and judges, that the mother-in-law who had been deemed suitable only for domestic service was now one of the most respected businesswomen in the state. The second blow had been delivered, and this one would cut far deeper than professional embarrassment. This one would force them to confront the magnitude of their own poor judgment and the extent of what they had lost when they chose to see me as less than I was. By autumn, the contrast between my rising success and Lila's spectacular downfall had become impossible for anyone in our mutual social circles to ignore. Mary's Table was featured on the cover of Texas Monthly as one of the state's premier catering companies. I had been invited to serve on the board of the Austin Culinary Institute, and my calendar was booked solid through the following year with events for politicians, celebrities, and business leaders. Meanwhile, Lila's PR business had collapsed entirely. Her remaining clients had fled after a particularly disastrous event where she had failed to secure the promised celebrity appearances, had double-booked the venue, and had responded to complaints by blaming everyone involved except herself. The story had spread throughout Austin's professional community, effectively ending any hope she might have had of rebuilding her reputation. But the final blow to Lila's standing came in the form of an invitation that represented everything she had ever wanted: the Austin Symphony's annual Black Tie Gala, the most prestigious social event of the year. I had been hired to cater the VIP reception, an intimate gathering of the Symphony's most generous donors and influential supporters. It was exactly the kind of high-profile event that would have been the pinnacle of Lila's social ambitions, and I knew that she would have moved heaven and earth to attend as a guest. The irony that I would be there as the featured caterer, commanding the respect and admiration of everyone present, while she remained conspicuously absent from the guest list, was not lost on me. I arrived at the Symphony Hall 3 hours before the reception, wearing the elegant black dress and pearls that had become my signature look for high-end events. My team of servers moved with practiced efficiency, transforming the donor lounge into something that looked like it belonged in a European palace. The evening's success was evident from the moment the first guests arrived. Patricia Morrison was there, of course, along with Judge Caldwell and several other women who had become regular clients and genuine friends. Governor Richardson's wife complimented me personally on the canapes, and the Symphony's board president announced to the gathered crowd that Mary's Table had elevated the standard for charitable event catering throughout the state. But the moment that crystallized my complete triumph came when I overheard a conversation between two prominent Austin socialites near the bar. "Did you know that Mary Paul used to be related to the Morrison family somehow?" one was saying to the other. "Really? How so?" "Her son was married to Patricia's daughter-in-law. The one who used to have that PR business that went under so spectacularly." "Oh, Lila Morrison. Yes, I heard about that debacle with the tech company launch. Didn't she end up owing them money? Something like that. The whole thing was quite embarrassing for the family. But apparently, Mary left that situation and built this incredible business entirely on her own." How inspiring. It just goes to show that sometimes the most devastating thing that can happen to you turns out to be the best thing that ever happened to you. As I listened to this conversation, I felt a deep sense of completion. The narrative had been rewritten entirely. I was no longer the rejected mother-in-law who had been cast aside by her ungrateful family. I was the successful entrepreneur who had escaped a limiting situation and built something extraordinary with her own talents and determination. The reception was such a success that I was approached by 3 different board members asking about my availability for their own upcoming events. The symphony's development director mentioned that they were considering making Mary's Table their exclusive caterer for all future donor events. But the most meaningful moment of the evening came when Patricia approached me as the reception was winding down. "Mary, I have something I need to tell you," she said, her expression serious. "David and I had a conversation recently about Lila, about their marriage, about the family situation." I waited, sensing that this was important. "He told me about what happened with you and Michael, about the ultimatum they gave you. I want you to know that we are horrified by the way you were treated." "That's very kind of you to say." "It's not kindness, Mary. It's accuracy. David is beginning to understand that he married someone whose values are fundamentally incompatible with our family's principles. Someone who would treat a family member the way Lila treated you. Well, that reveals something essential about her character." Patricia paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think David is starting to question whether his marriage was a mistake. And frankly, after seeing what you've accomplished, after getting to know who you really are, we are questioning it too." This was more than I had dared to hope for. The Morrison family wasn't just recognizing my worth. They were beginning to see Lila's treatment of me as a reflection of her fundamental unsuitability as a member of their family. "These things are always complicated," I said diplomatically.
They are.
"But some things are less complicated than others. Character, for instance. Integrity. The way someone treats people they perceive as having less power than they do. Those things tend to be pretty clear indicators of who someone really is." As I drove home that night, I reflected on how completely the situation had been reversed. A year ago, I had been the desperate widow begging for a place in my son's household. Tonight, I was the successful businesswoman being courted by the state's most influential families, while my former tormentor's marriage crumbled under the weight of her own poor choices and cruel nature. My phone rang as I was getting ready for bed. For the first time in months, I answered a call from Michael. "Mom." His voice was subdued, almost defeated. "Mom, we need to talk." "Hello, Michael. Things have gotten complicated here. Lila and I are having problems. Big problems." I waited, letting him find his own words. "Her business failed completely. She's been lying to me about money, about contracts, about pretty much everything. And David's parents, they're not speaking to her anymore. Something about how she treated you. I'm sorry to hear that you're having difficulties." "Mom, I made a mistake. A huge mistake. I should never have let her talk to you the way she did. I should never have given you that ultimatum. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." The apology I had waited for was finally coming, but it felt less satisfying than I had expected. Not because it wasn't genuine. I could hear the real remorse in Michael's voice, but because it was coming too late and for the wrong reasons. "I appreciate you saying that, Michael. Mom, I know I don't deserve to ask, but could we meet?
Could we talk?
I want to try to make things right between us." I considered his request carefully. A part of me wanted to refuse, to let him experience the same rejection and dismissal that he had inflicted on me. But a larger part of me recognized that holding on to anger would ultimately hurt me more than it would hurt him. "We can meet," I said finally. "But not because I need your approval or your help. Because I think you need to understand what happened here and what it cost all of us." "Thank you, Mom. Thank you so much. I'll call you tomorrow to arrange something." After I hung up, I sat in my quiet guest house and thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. A year ago, I had left my son's house with nothing but a suitcase and wounded pride. Tonight, I was one of the most successful caterers in Texas, with a calendar full of prestigious events and a reputation built entirely on my own merit. More importantly, I had discovered something about myself that I had forgotten during all those years of being someone's wife and someone's mother. I was capable of extraordinary things when I wasn't trying to make myself smaller for other people's comfort. The fall had been complete, not just Lila's fall from whatever social heights she had imagined she was climbing, but the fall of the entire narrative that had positioned me as the problem in our family dynamic. Now everyone could see the truth. I hadn't been the burden that needed to be managed or the charity case that needed to be helped. I had been the one with the strength, the intelligence, and the character to build something beautiful from nothing. And that truth would follow all of us for the rest of our lives. Mary's complete transformation from rejected mother-in-law to celebrated entrepreneur is absolutely magnificent. The way she's achieved total vindication while maintaining her dignity, that's the kind of victory that speaks to something deep in all of us. If you're feeling that powerful sense of justice and triumph for Mary, hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to see that our worth isn't determined by how others treat us. We're approaching the final chapter of Mary's incredible journey, and you won't want to miss how this story concludes. Stay with us. The ending will leave you feeling empowered and inspired about your own incredible potential.